Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. So, my name's Jessica, and I grew up in a family that ran this small, but successful manufacturing business. My dad built it from the ground up, and ever since I can remember, it was always understood that one day, I'd take over. My dad used to say it to me all the time, how I was the future of the family business. I'd spend weekends shadowing him at work, learning the ropes, and honestly, I loved it. This wasn't just some fallback plan, I was passionate about it. When my mom passed away, Dad remarried pretty quickly. Enter my stepmother Karen, yes, her real name, and her son Quentin. Quentin was a handful, to put it lightly. He never worked a day in his life, partied his way through college, and somehow still came out with a degree in something completely unrelated to the business. My dad treated him like a son, which fair enough, but Quentin never showed any interest in the company, or any responsibility for that matter. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. A few months ago, my dad called a big family meeting. I thought it was going to be the formal announcement that I'd officially be stepping into a leadership role. I was 27, and I'd been working at the company full-time since graduating college. I'd climbed the ranks, put in the hours, and practically poured my soul into the place. But instead, he blindsided me. He announced that he was retiring earlier than planned and that Quentin would be taking over as CEO. I don't even remember what excuse he gave, something about wanting to give Quentin a chance and blending the family. My dad looked at me like he expected me to smile and clap. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I tried to argue, to reason with him. I reminded him of all the work I'd done, the plans I had for the company's future. I even told him I'd been preparing for this my whole life. But all he said was, "Jess, it's just business. Quentin deserves a shot too." I looked over at Quentin, and I'll never forget the smug grin on his face. He didn't even try to act humble or grateful. He just looked like he'd won the lottery. That night, I packed a bag and left. I couldn't stay under the same roof as them anymore. I felt like my dad had taken everything I'd worked for, everything I dreamed of, and handed it to someone who didn't even care. It wasn't just a betrayal, it felt personal. Like I didn't matter anymore. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew I couldn't stay there. So I left the house, the company, everything. I didn't realize at the time that leaving would be the best decision I'd ever make. After I left that night, I crashed at a friend's place for a while. I couldn't bring myself to tell her the whole story at first because saying it out loud made it feel too real. I just said there was family drama, which honestly, was the understatement of the century. The first few weeks were a blur. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat properly. I'd put my entire life into the family business, and suddenly it wasn't mine anymore. I couldn't even think about what I'd do next because the only thing I'd ever envisioned was gone. Then one day, as I was sifting through some of my old boxes, I came across a letter from my grandmother. It was one of those, just-in-case letters she'd written before she passed. She had been my biggest supporter growing up, always encouraging me to chase my dreams. I hadn't read it since the day of her funeral because, honestly, it was too painful back then. But now? I was desperate for any kind of guidance. I opened the letter, and her words hit me like a lightning bolt. "Jessica, if you're reading this, it means life has thrown you a curveball. And knowing you, you'll handle it with the same grit and determination I've always admired in you. I set something aside for you, but only if you promise me one thing: you'll carve your own path. I want you to start something from the ground up, just like I did, and prove to the world, and to yourself, what you're capable of." I was confused at first, but then I read the rest. My grandmother had set up a trust fund for me, one I knew nothing about. The catch? I could only access it if I created a successful business by the time I turned 30. I had just under 3 years. At first, I wasn't sure if I should laugh or cry. Here I was, at my lowest point, and my grandmother, gone for years, was still pushing me forward. It felt like she was in the room with me, telling me, "You've got this, kid." I called the lawyer mentioned in the letter the next morning. He confirmed everything and explained that the trust wasn't some insane amount of money, but enough to cover startup costs. I asked him why she never told me about this, and he said, "Your grandmother always believed in earning success, not being handed it. Sounds like she knew you'd need this one day." That was it. My focus shifted completely. I wasn't going to sit around wallowing anymore. If my dad and Quentin thought they could shut me out, they were in for a surprise. I didn't know exactly what kind of business I wanted to start yet, but I did know one thing: whatever it was, I was going to pour everything into it. Not just to prove them wrong, but to prove to myself, and to my grandmother, that I could do this. Once I decided to start my own business, I had to figure out what kind of business it would be. At first, I was overwhelmed. There are so many industries out there, how do you even pick one? But I thought back to my time at the family business, the part one loved most: finding innovative solutions to reduce waste. Sustainability had always been important to me. At the old company, I'd been pushing to switch to more eco-friendly materials, but Quentin always dismissed it as too expensive and unnecessary. That memory made something click. Why not focus on sustainable packaging? I started researching like crazy. Did you know the packaging industry alone contributes to a massive amount of global waste? Companies were desperate for eco-friendly options, especially with all the environmental regulations popping up. There was a gap in the market, and I was determined to fill it. I spent weeks sketching ideas, reading industry reports, and reaching out to manufacturers who worked with biodegradable materials. I started small: recycled paper products, biodegradable wraps, compostable containers, things businesses could use as alternatives to the cheap, wasteful stuff. I didn't have much experience with suppliers, so I asked a friend who worked in logistics to help me map out how I could get materials at a reasonable cost. But it wasn't just about the product. I wanted to create something with a purpose. My brand had to represent more than just eco-friendly packaging. I wanted it to symbolize resilience and perseverance. It was like, if I could rebuild my life, maybe this company could help rebuild the way businesses thought about packaging. So I named the company Green Rise Packaging, a nod to rising above challenges while being green. It felt like a fresh start, not just for the environment, but for me too. Of course, starting wasn't easy. The trust fund gave me seed money, but it didn't cover everything. I had to bootstrap the rest. I took on freelance consulting gigs, lived off instant noodles for weeks, and cut every expense I could think of. Every penny I made went straight back into the business. And just as I was starting to gain momentum, Quentin found out what I was doing. It didn't take long for Quentin to catch wind of what I was doing. I'm guessing someone from the old company mentioned it, or maybe he just couldn't resist snooping. Either way, he showed up unannounced at the co-working space I was renting. I'll never forget the look on his face, half smug, half amused. He walked in like he owned the place, wearing one of those ridiculous suits that screamed, "I'm trying too hard." "So this is what you've been up to," he said, looking around like the walls would cave in any second. "Starting a little craft project?" I wanted to ignore him, but I couldn't let him rattle me. "It's called a business," I said. "Something you'd know nothing about." That hit a nerve. His smirk faded for a second before he recovered. "Look, Jess," he said, leaning against my desk like he was doing me a favor just by being there. "I get it. You're upset about Dad's decision, but this isn't going to work. You're playing in the big leagues now, and honestly, I don't think you're cut out for it." I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but I stayed calm. "Thanks for the pep talk, Quentin. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have real work to do." He didn't leave. Instead, he leaned closer and said, "You're wasting your time. Dad's company is a well-oiled machine, and we have the resources to crush any competition. Especially whatever this is." He gestured at my modest setup like it was a lemonade stand. That was the moment I realized what he was really doing. He was scared. He might have had the title, but deep down, he knew he couldn't handle it. And the idea that I could succeed without the family business must have been eating at him. "You're welcome to try," I said, staring him down. "But I'm not afraid of you. Now, unless you're here to order some sustainable packaging, you can see yourself out." He laughed like I'd told the funniest joke he'd ever heard, but I could tell I'd gotten under his skin. "Good luck," he said as he left. "You're going to need it." I thought that was the end of it. I figured he'd go back to his cushy office and forget about me. But I underestimated how far Quentin would go to sabotage me. A couple of weeks after Quentin's little visit, I started noticing strange things happening. At first, it was small stuff: delays with my suppliers, emails that mysteriously went unanswered, potential clients suddenly backing out of deals. I brushed it off as bad luck or rookie mistakes, but then it got worse. One day, a big order I'd secured from a local cafe chain was cancelled out of nowhere. I called the owner, Rachel, to ask what had happened. She sounded awkward, almost embarrassed. Jess, I'm so sorry, she said. I really liked your product, but someone from your old company reached out. They told me your operation wasn't reliable. My stomach dropped. Wait, what? Who said that? She hesitated for a second, then said, Quentin. He called me directly and said they've had issues with you in the past and that I'd be better off sticking with a more established supplier. I was fuming. Not only was he spreading lies about me, but he was actively poaching my clients. I thanked Rachel for telling me and promised her I'd prove my company's reliability. She sounded sympathetic but didn't budge. That wasn't the only incident. Quentin started pulling strings everywhere. He reached out to other contacts I'd made during my time at the family business, feeding them the same nonsense about me being unreliable or in over my head. He even had the nerve to offer discounts through the family company to steal them away. It was sabotage, plain and simple. And the worst part? It was working. I felt like I was fighting an uphill battle with a 100-pound weight strapped to my back. Every time I thought I'd made progress, Quentin would swoop in and undo it. But here's the thing about me, I don't back down. My grandma didn't raise me to fold under pressure, and I wasn't about to let Quentin win. I started documenting everything, every canceled deal, every coincidental issue with my suppliers, every client who told me Quentin had contacted them. I consulted a lawyer to see if I could take legal action for defamation or interference, but since I didn't have hard proof yet, I had to bide my time. In the meantime, I leaned on the network I'd been quietly building. Some of the smaller businesses I was working with had experienced the same kind of corporate bullying from bigger companies, so they had my back. A couple of them even reached out to others in their network to spread the word about green rise packaging. And then, out of nowhere, I got my first big break. Just when I was starting to feel like I couldn't catch a break, I got an email that changed everything. It was from a boutique grocery chain called Fresh Roots. They were expanding across the state and wanted to revamp their entire packaging line to align with their sustainability goals. I almost didn't believe it at first. This wasn't some tiny cafe or mom-and-pop shop. This was a real, established brand. If I could land this deal, it would put green rise packaging on the map. I scheduled a meeting with their operations manager, Laura, who wanted to see samples and hear my pitch. I stayed up all night perfecting my presentation, making sure every detail was flawless. I knew this was my shot, and I wasn't going to blow it. The meeting was nerve-wracking but went better than I could have hoped. Laura loved the products, especially how customizable and affordable they were compared to other eco-friendly options. She said she'd need to run it by the higher-ups but felt confident they'd move forward with me. For the first time in months, I felt like I was winning. But, of course, Quentin wasn't done meddling. A few days later, Laura called me and said she'd received some concerning feedback about my company. My heart sank. Here we go again. Apparently, someone told us you don't have the capacity to handle a client of our size, she said. I took a deep breath and asked her who said it. She hesitated, then said, It doesn't matter. What does matter is whether or not it's true. This was my chance. I told Laura about everything. How I'd left my family's business, how Quentin was trying to sabotage me, and how I'd been fighting tooth and nail to build something from scratch. I didn't hold back. I even showed her emails and documents I'd collected proving the issues I'd been dealing with weren't my fault. To my surprise, Laura listened. She didn't seem put off by the drama. If anything, she looked impressed by how open and determined I was. Jessica, I appreciate your honesty, she said. And honestly? If you've managed to keep going despite all this, I think that says more about your capabilities than anything your stepbrother could say. I wanted to cry from relief, but I kept it together. Laura told me they'd move forward with a trial order, and if things went well, we'd discuss a long-term contract. This deal gave me the boost I needed, not just financially, but mentally. I was done playing defense. If Quentin wanted a fight, he was going to get one. With Fresh Roots on board for a trial order, I knew this was my moment to step up. I threw myself into the work, ensuring every detail was flawless. I personally oversaw production, inspected every shipment, and followed up with Laura after each delivery. I wasn't just determined to prove myself, I was determined to crush the narrative Quentin was spinning about me. And it paid off. After a few weeks, Laura called and said, Jess, we're thrilled with your work. Let's talk long-term. That phone call lit a fire under me. The Fresh Roots contract didn't just provide stable revenue, it gave Green Rise credibility. Once I announced the partnership on our website and social media, I noticed more inquiries coming in from businesses I'd never even approached. But I didn't stop there. I started leveraging everything I'd learned from working at my dad's company. I knew the pain points businesses had with packaging suppliers, high costs, long lead times, and poor customer service. I made it GreenRise's mission to solve all those issues. Every client got personalized attention. Every order was delivered on time, or early. And our pricing? Competitive without cutting corners. Meanwhile, I kept documenting every shady thing Quinton was pulling. By this point, his interference was becoming more obvious to others too. One of my suppliers forwarded me an email from Quinton, where he'd outright offered them money to delay my shipments. Another client, who chose to stay with me despite his attempts, shared that Quinton had offered them deep discounts if they dropped GreenRise. Quinton's desperation was starting to show. Then came the tipping point. A reporter for a local business journal reached out to me for a feature on small businesses making big waves. I was hesitant at first, worried the article might draw more of Quinton's ire, but then I realized, why not use this to my advantage? During the interview, I talked about my journey, how I left the family business to build something sustainable, how I believed in innovation over shortcuts, and how I refused to give up despite facing unexpected challenges. I didn't name Quinton directly, but I hinted at corporate bullying. When the article was published, it got way more attention than I expected. The headline read, "Jessica Marks builds green business after family betrayal, and thrives." The piece highlighted GreenRise's growth, our Fresh Roots partnership, and my commitment to sustainability. And just like that, Quinton's attempts to drag my name through the mud started backfiring. After the article about GreenRise went live, I started hearing whispers about trouble at my dad's company. At first, I didn't pay much attention. I was too busy handling the flood of inquiries that came in after the article. But then one of my old coworkers, still loyal to me, sent me a text. "You're not gonna believe this. Quinton's losing it over here. Sales are tanking, and suppliers are threatening to pull out." I couldn't help but smile when I read it. Turns out, Quinton's management style, or lack thereof, was catching up to him. He wasn't just sabotaging me, he was sabotaging himself. From what I heard, he'd been making risky decisions to keep the business afloat, slashing prices too low, overpromising to clients, and cutting corners on materials. Clients were complaining about delays, poor quality, and terrible customer service. Suppliers were frustrated because invoices weren't being paid on time. And then the nail in the coffin, a whistleblower came forward with proof that Quinton had been falsifying reports to make the company's numbers look better than they were. I didn't want to get too excited. After all, my dad was still involved in the business, and as angry as I was at him, I didn't want his livelihood to collapse. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel a sense of justice. Quinton was finally being exposed for the fraud he was. What really blew my mind was how quickly the fallout spread. Within weeks, news broke that the company was under investigation for ethical violations. Some of their biggest clients pulled their contracts, and suppliers began demanding payment up front. Employees started quitting left and right, frustrated with the chaos. And where was my dad in all of this? Silent. The ethics investigation was the beginning of the end for Quinton. Once the retailer's complaint became public, other clients started coming forward with their own grievances. Late deliveries, misrepresented products, price gouging, you name it, Quinton's name was attached to it. I heard through the grapevine that my dad was furious. He'd put his faith in Quinton, probably hoping to blend the family, and now the company's reputation was circling the drain. But here's the kicker, instead of taking responsibility, Quinton doubled down. He blamed everyone but himself, employees, suppliers, even clients. That's when the cracks turned into full-blown fractures. A couple of their major clients pulled out entirely, citing trust issues. Suppliers started demanding upfront payments, refusing to extend credit because they didn't trust Quinton to pay on time. And then there was the staff exodus. Remember that former employee who spilled the tea? She told me that people were quitting en masse. No one wanted to stick around under Quinton's so-called leadership. Meanwhile, GreenRise was thriving. The Fresh Roots contract had opened doors I never thought possible. I was getting inquiries from bigger brands, expanding my product line, and hiring my own small but passionate team. The contrast between our companies couldn't have been clearer. Quinton's was falling apart, and mine was rising from the ashes. It was a little surreal watching from the sidelines as my dad's company, the one I had worked so hard to help build, started crumbling under Quinton's leadership. I'd spent months trying to put it out of my mind, but I won't lie, it was satisfying seeing the fallout of his incompetence. Still, I wasn't prepared for what happened next. One afternoon, out of the blue, I got a call from my dad. We hadn't spoken since the day I left, and hearing his voice brought up a lot of mixed emotions. For a second, I thought about ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Jessica," he said, his tone unusually subdued. "Can we talk?" I didn't say anything right away, just let the silence hang there. Then I asked, "Why now?" He sighed, and I could tell this wasn't going to be an easy conversation for him. "I made a mistake," he admitted. "A big one." That caught me off guard. My dad wasn't the type to admit when he was wrong, especially not to me. He went on to explain that Quinton's leadership had been a disaster. The ethics investigation, the client losses, the staff exodus, it had all come to a head. And now, the company was on the verge of bankruptcy. "I should have trusted you," he said quietly. "You were ready. You've always been ready." I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong. Hearing those words should have felt like a victory, but instead, I felt this overwhelming sense of sadness. For years, all I'd wanted was his acknowledgement, his trust. And now when I'd finally moved on, he was giving it to me, too late. "What do you want from me, Dad?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I want to fix things," he said. "I need your help to save the company." I almost laughed. He wanted my help after tossing me aside for Quinton? After everything I'd been through? "You can't be serious," I said. "You chose him. You let him destroy everything. And now you want me to clean up his mess." "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said. "But this company was your mother's dream too. I can't let it die like this. Please, Jessica. I need you." That hit me hard. My mom had poured her heart into the business before she passed, and part of me still felt connected to it because of her. But at the same time, I couldn't just ignore everything my dad and Quinton had done. "I'll think about it," I said finally, and we ended the call. For the next few days, I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my head. I talked it over with some friends and even my team at Greenrise. Everyone had different opinions. Some said I should let the company fail as a lesson to my dad and Quinton, while others thought I should step in to honor my mom's legacy. Ultimately, I realized I didn't want to go back, not to the company, not to working for my dad, and definitely not to cleaning up Quinton's mess. But I also didn't want the business to crash and burn because of them. So I called my dad back and told him my decision. "I'm not coming back," I said firmly. "But if you want my advice, sell the company. Find a buyer who cares about what Mom built and can actually run it properly. It's the only way to save it." He didn't argue. He just said, "I understand." After my conversation with my dad, I thought I was done with the whole mess. I'd given him my advice, and whatever happened next wasn't my problem anymore. But of course, Quinton wasn't going down without dragging everyone else with him. About a week later, I got a call from one of my suppliers. He sounded uneasy as he asked, "Jessica, are you shutting down Greenrise?" "What? No. Why would you think that?" He hesitated. "Someone reached out claiming your business was under investigation for fraud. They said we should stop working with you." I didn't need to ask who it was. Quinton was trying to sabotage me again, this time by outright lying. My stomach churned. If suppliers started believing him, I could lose everything I'd worked so hard to build. But this time, I wasn't caught off guard. I had the receipts, emails, contracts, proof of every shady move he'd pulled in the past. I called my lawyer immediately and had her draft a cease and desist letter. She also suggested we contact the reporter who'd written the article about me. I wasn't sure at first, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized, people like Quinton thrive on staying in the shadows. He counted on me being too busy or scared to fight back. So I decided to shine a spotlight on him. The reporter jumped at the chance to do a follow-up story. She dug into the ethics investigation, interviewed some of my suppliers and clients, and even managed to get a former employee from my dad's company to go on the record about Quinton's behavior. The resulting article was brutal. The headline: CEO sabotages family rival's business amid company's collapse. The article didn't just expose Quinton's attempts to sabotage me, it also revealed the internal chaos at the company. It painted a picture of a desperate man trying to cover up his own failures by dragging others down. The fallout was immediate. Quinton's remaining clients started pulling out, suppliers refused to work with him, and even his own employees turned against him. My dad had no choice but to step in and remove him as CEO. It should have felt like a victory, but honestly, I just felt tired. I was done with the drama, done with Quentin, and done with the family business. After that call with my dad, I thought I'd washed my hands of the whole thing. I'd given him my advice: sell the company, salvage what was left of my mom's dream, and move on. It wasn't my mess to fix anymore. But of course, things weren't that simple. A few weeks later, I got another call from someone I hadn't expected, one of my dad's former employees, Diane. She'd been a senior manager at the company for years, someone I'd worked closely with when I was there. Diane was loyal, hardworking, and fiercely protective of the business. She was also one of the few people who had supported me when I left. "Jessica, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice tense. Apparently, things had gone from bad to worse. Quentin, in a last-ditch effort to prove he could turn the company around, had made a deal with a supplier known for cutting corners. This wasn't just bad business, it was reckless. Diane told me that some of the materials Quentin had approved didn't meet safety standards, and if the products made from those materials hit the market, it could lead to recalls, lawsuits, and even more damage to the company's reputation. "Your dad is trying to clean it up quietly," Diane said. "But it's a mess. I thought you should know." Hearing this made my blood boil. Not only had Quentin driven the company into the ground, but now he was jeopardizing its integrity, and more importantly, my mom's legacy. I didn't want to get involved, but I couldn't just sit back and let this happen. I called my dad. "Is it true?" I asked bluntly. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he admitted it. "Yes," he said. "We're handling it." Handling it. I snapped. "Quentin's incompetence is about to drag this company into a full-blown scandal, and you're still letting him call the shots?" My dad sighed. "He's stepping down," he said quietly. "Effective immediately." I wasn't sure I'd heard him right at first. "What?" "He's done," my dad said. "I should have seen it sooner, but he's not cut out for this. I've already started looking for a buyer for the company." The news floored me. For years, I'd begged my dad to see Quentin for who he really was, and now finally, it had sunk in. But the damage was already done. The company was a shell of what it used to be, and my dad was left picking up the pieces. As for Quentin, I'd love to say he took responsibility for his failures, but that would be giving him too much credit. From what I heard, he stormed out of the office, blaming everyone but himself. Last I checked, he was posting on social media about starting some investment firm. With Quentin out of the picture and the company on the market, I felt a strange sense of closure. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of my family's dysfunction on my shoulders. I could finally focus on Greenrise, and on building something that mattered. But there was still one thing left to do. I kept thinking about my grandmother's letter, how she'd encouraged me to carve my own path. And I realized that Greenrise wasn't just a business, it was a chance to honor the values she'd instilled in me. So I took a portion of the profits from my Fresh Roots contract and started something new, the Rising Roots Foundation. Its mission? To provide funding and mentorship for entrepreneurs, especially women, who wanted to create businesses with a purpose, just like I had. Launching the foundation felt like coming full circle. It wasn't just about proving Quentin and my dad wrong anymore. It was about leaving something behind that would outlast all the drama, all the betrayal. It's been a year since my dad sold the company. The new owners rebranded it, cleaned up the mess Quentin left behind, and turned it into something respectable again. I'm not involved, but knowing my mom's dream didn't completely die gives me some peace. As for my dad, we're okay. He apologized again, and while I'm not sure we'll ever be as close as we once were, we're slowly rebuilding our relationship. I can tell he regrets what happened, and I think losing the company humbled him in a way nothing else could. And me? Greenrise is thriving. We've expanded to new markets, hired more staff, and are working on some exciting new product lines. But the thing I'm most proud of is the foundation. Every time I see someone launch a business with our support, I think of my grandmother and smile. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that betrayal doesn't have to define you. It hurts, more than words can express, but it can also push you to find strength you didn't know you had. I don't know if my dad and Quentin ever thought I'd succeed, but in the end, their doubts didn't matter. I didn't just survive their betrayal, I thrived because of it. Thanks for letting me share my story. If you're going through something similar, just know, you're stronger than you think. And sometimes, carving your own path is the best revenge. After everything settled, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed. My dad had officially sold the family business to a larger corporation that promised to preserve the original values my mom had built it on. From what I heard, they'd already started turning things around, earning back the trust that Quentin had destroyed. I didn't reach out to the new owners or offer my input, I'd moved on. But knowing the company wasn't going to be buried by Quentin's incompetence was enough closure for me. My dad and I started talking more after the sale, though it was awkward at first. He apologized every time we spoke, sometimes stumbling over his words, other times getting choked up as he tried to explain himself. "I thought I was doing what was best for the family," he said once, his voice heavy with regret. "But I realize now I only pushed you away." Part of me wanted to keep my guard up, to protect myself from getting hurt again. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the dad who used to bring me along to work and teach me everything he knew, wanted to believe him. So I let him back in, slowly. I didn't forget what he'd done, but I also didn't want to let resentment define our relationship. Quentin, on the other hand, was nowhere to be seen. After his dramatic exit from the company, he completely disappeared from the family's radar. From what I could piece together, he tried to start some sketchy consulting business that went nowhere. Every now and then, I'd hear about him trying to make a comeback, but it never lasted. For someone who had been handed so many opportunities on a silver platter, he managed to squander every single one. I wasn't surprised. As for me, Green Rise was thriving in ways I never could have imagined. That partnership with Fresh Roots led to others, and soon I was working with major grocery chains, restaurants, and even a couple of tech companies looking for sustainable packaging for their products. My team grew from a few freelancers and part-timers to a dedicated group of people who shared my vision. We were creating something that wasn't just profitable, it was impactful. But what really made me proud was the Rising Roots Foundation. When I started it, I didn't know if it would take off or if anyone would care about my vision of supporting entrepreneurs with purpose-driven ideas. But the response was overwhelming. The first grant we gave went to a single mom who wanted to start a community garden business in her neighborhood. The second went to a young woman developing biodegradable alternatives for single-use plastic utensils. Each time we funded a project, it felt like I was paying forward everything my grandmother had given me, her belief in me, her support, and her quiet reminder that I was capable of so much more than I realized. Sometimes I'd think about her letter, the one I'd found when I was at my lowest. I'd reread it whenever I needed a boost, her words reminding me of the strength I'd found in myself. I like to imagine what she'd say if she could see me now, if she'd be proud of the company I'd built and the legacy I was carrying on in her honor. I hoped she would be. Life wasn't perfect, of course. Rebuilding my relationship with my dad took time, and there were moments when old wounds reopened. But with every conversation, every visit, we found common ground again. He even asked if he could help with the foundation in some way, and while I was hesitant at first, I eventually let him join in small ways. It felt like a step forward, even if it wasn't a perfect one. In the end, I realized that everything I'd gone through, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the uphill battle of starting from scratch, had shaped me into someone stronger, more determined, and more focused than I ever thought I could be. Quentin's sabotage, my dad's misplaced trust, and even my own moments of doubt had all led me here. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Looking back now, I wouldn't change a thing. Sure, the path I'd been forced to take was harder, lonelier, and filled with more setbacks than I'd ever imagined. But it had also shown me what I was made of. And it reminded me that sometimes, the best revenge isn't tearing someone else down, it's building something incredible for yourself. So here I am, living proof that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning of something better, something stronger. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: when people underestimate you, don't waste time proving them wrong. Just prove yourself right. That's the real victory. That's really the end of the story. There wasn't some grand, explosive conclusion, no dramatic final confrontation or perfectly tied-up bow. Life doesn't work like that. Things kept moving forward, and I found myself getting further and further away from the hurt and anger that used to consume me. Green Rise is still growing, and every day brings new challenges. We've expanded into custom designs for e-commerce brands and even partnered with a few local governments to provide sustainable solutions for public events. It's more than I ever dreamed it could be, but the work never feels done. There's always more to accomplish, more ways to grow, and more people to reach. The Rising Roots Foundation has become my passion project. It's been humbling meeting so many people with incredible ideas who just need someone to believe in them. One of our most recent grant recipients, a young woman fresh out of college, started a company turning agricultural waste into compostable plates and cups. Seeing her journey reminds me so much of my own, and it's a full circle moment every time we're able to support someone like her. As for my personal life, I've found peace, not just with my dad, but with myself. My dad and I still talk regularly, and while I wouldn't say our relationship is completely healed, it's a work in progress. He even attended the launch of one of our new product lines last month, standing in the back of the room with a quiet, proud smile. I'll take that as a win. And Quinton? I don't hear much about him these days. Every now and then, someone will mention him in passing, how he's bouncing from one failed venture to another, but I don't let it bother me. He's no longer part of my story, and honestly, that's the way it should be. I don't need him or his failures to fuel my success anymore. It's strange to think about how far I've come. When I left my dad's house that night, I felt like my world had ended. But in reality, it was just the beginning of a better chapter. All the pain, the betrayal, and the doubt, they didn't break me. They built me. And they gave me the strength to build something meaningful, something lasting. If you've stuck with me through this whole story, thank you. I hope it shows that no matter how bad things get, there's always a way forward. You don't need anyone's approval or permission to succeed. You just need to believe in yourself, and when you can't, find the people who will. This might sound cheesy, but my grandmother's voice still echoes in my head sometimes, especially when I'm faced with a big decision or a new challenge. "You've got this, kid," she used to say, and now I believe it. I really do. So if you're reading this and you're feeling stuck or betrayed or like the odds are stacked against you, just know, you've got this too. That's really all there is to tell. There's no dramatic epilogue where everything suddenly becomes perfect, no Hollywood ending where all the wounds are magically healed. Life isn't like that. Instead, it's been a slow, steady climb, one where I've had to learn how to keep going, even when things don't feel fully resolved. Green Rise continues to grow, and I've realized it's more than a business to me. It's proof of what I'm capable of. We've expanded into international markets, partnered with some of the biggest eco-conscious brands out there, and are developing some cutting-edge biodegradable solutions I'm genuinely excited about. The work is constant, but it's fulfilling. Every time I see our products in stores or hear from clients about how we've helped them reduce their environmental impact, it reminds me why I started this in the first place. The Rising Roots Foundation has taken on a life of its own too. We've funded over 50 entrepreneurs so far, each with unique, inspiring ideas. One of my favorite stories is a mother-daughter duo who used their grant to start a sustainable textiles business. They sent me a thank you letter, and the way they talked about their dreams coming to life, it reminded me of how I felt the first time I saw Green Rise succeed. Knowing I've played even a small part in helping people like them makes all the hard work worth it. As for my personal life, I've found a balance that works for me. My relationship with my dad is functional. We talk every few weeks, mostly about work or surface-level updates, but that's okay. I've accepted that we'll probably never have the closeness we once did, and I'm at peace with that. He made his choices, and so did I. What matters now is that we're both trying in our own way. Quinton, on the other hand, is basically a ghost from my past. Last I heard, he was trying to launch some ridiculous online coaching scheme, but it tanked almost immediately. I don't keep tabs on him, and honestly, I prefer it that way. Letting go of the anger I held toward him was one of the hardest but most freeing things I've ever done. The funny thing is, I don't even think about proving myself anymore. Not to Quinton, not to my dad, not to anyone. I've realized that the person I was really trying to prove something to all along was me. And now, when I look at everything I've built, I know I've done that. I've succeeded on my own terms, and I've built a life I'm proud of. I still think about my mom and my grandmother often. Whenever I hit a milestone with Green Rise or the foundation, I feel like they're right there with me, cheering me on. I hope they'd be proud of the woman I've become and the choices I've made to honor their legacies. I'm not sure what's next for me, maybe expanding the foundation, maybe taking Green Rise into even bigger markets. Or maybe just taking a step back and enjoying the life I've worked so hard to build. For now, I'm content knowing I've turned what could have been a story of defeat into one of resilience and purpose. And if there's one thing I want people to take from this, it's that betrayal doesn't have to break you. Sometimes, it's the push you need to find your true path. You don't need validation from the people who let you down. The best thing you can do, the most powerful thing, is to build your own success and let your life speak for itself. That's the real ending to this story. No fireworks, no revenge, no dramatic final moments. Just me, living my life, on my own terms. And honestly, that's more than enough for me. There's not much left to say, really. Life kept moving forward, and so did I. Greenrise grew into something far bigger than I ever dreamed it could be. What started as a way to prove myself after being betrayed turned into a mission I genuinely believe in. A way to make an impact, not just on the environment, but on the way people do business. We've expanded into several new industries, partnering with tech companies, beauty brands, and even a few big-name retailers looking to go green. It's surreal sometimes, walking into a store and seeing our packaging on the shelves, knowing that something I created is helping to make even a small dent in the problem of waste. The Rising Roots Foundation has become a cornerstone of my work. It's no longer just about giving grants, it's about building a community. We host workshops, networking events, and mentorship programs for entrepreneurs who, like me, are starting from scratch with nothing but a dream. Seeing them succeed has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. One of the foundation's recipients recently sat down with me after her company hit its first big milestone. She told me, with tears in her eyes, that she'd never imagined anyone would take a chance on her. Hearing that reminded me so much of where I started, feeling abandoned, underestimated, and unsure if I could make it. Helping others climb out of that space has been healing for me in ways I didn't expect. As for my family, things are steady. My dad and I talk more now, but the conversations are light and careful, like we're both trying not to reopen old wounds. He'll ask how Greenrise is doing, and I'll ask how he's enjoying retirement. We don't dive too deep, but that's okay. Sometimes relationships don't need to go back to what they were, they just need to find a new normal. Quentin is nothing more than a memory now. I don't hear about him, I don't think about him, and honestly, I've stopped caring what he's up to. He's no longer a factor in my life, and that's the most freeing thing of all. Recently, I visited my grandmother's grave for the first time in years. I brought a small box of biodegradable packaging samples with me, not for her, obviously, but as a symbol of everything she inspired me to build. I told her about Greenrise, the foundation, and how her letter changed everything for me. It felt good to say it out loud, like I was closing a chapter one didn't even realize was still open. When I walked away from that grave, I felt lighter. Not because all the pain and betrayal were magically gone, but because I realized they no longer had power over me. I'd taken everything that tried to break me and turned it into something stronger. This is my life now, a life I built, a legacy I'm proud of, and a future that feels wide open. There's no grand finale, no dramatic twist. Just me, living with purpose, finding joy in small victories, and knowing I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. If you've read this far, thank you for sticking with me. And if you're going through something similar, just know this: the betrayal, the pain, the setbacks, they don't define you. What you do next does. And I promise, you're stronger than you think. You've got this.